Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to some of you. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar exploring where we are in terms of ocean-based climate action in the latest round of NDCs and the value of ocean accounts as a tool that can support countries as they move from that commitment phase right through to implementation. I am Eliza Northrop. I am a director at the Centre for Sustainable Development Reform at the University of New South Wales. We host the Secretariat for the Global Ocean Accounts Partnership and have been doing a lot of work at this ocean and climate intersection. This webinar is coming in advance of the 3rd UN Ocean Conference, which is taking place in Nice, France, early next month. And then immediately following the UN Ocean Conference will be the 5th Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue under the UNFCCC in Bonn. So a really important moment as we head to the middle of the year in driving forward change and action at the ocean and climate change nexus. Obviously, 2025 is also a really pivotal year. It is the year where we see new and updated nationally determined contributions being communicated by parties to the Paris Agreement, as well as, for the first time, new and updated national biodiversity strategy and action plans, NBSAPs, under the CBD process, responding to the new Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and those 23 targets for action on biodiversity loss. So the first time we've got 2 processes happening this year, both highly relevant to the ocean from a climate change perspective, from a biodiversity perspective, and an unprecedented opportunity to both align these processes and really seize the opportunities that these international commitments and mechanism processes offer for ocean climate action. I'm going to start today's webinar with talking through some analysis that we've done of the NDCs and the NBSAP that have been communicated to date, focusing on ocean-based climate action that's communicated in the NDCs and seeing where there's synergies in the NBSAP. And then I'm going to hand to one of my colleagues within the Global Ocean Accounts Partnership to explain what ocean accounts are and their potential value to countries as they move to implementing some of these new ocean-based commitments and really positioning ocean accounts as an important tool for implementation. From there, we're thrilled to welcome 2 country representatives from Maldives and from Indonesia. I'll introduce both later to really present their perspective on the value of ocean accounts and how their respective countries are conceiving of the use of ocean accounts in some of these critical ocean climate sectors. So before I talked about sort of the NDCs and NBSAPs, I just wanted to, for those of you perhaps not following this as closely, share a couple of the analytical pieces that very much frame the opportunity presented by ocean-based climate action and have been critical in doing this over the last 5 or 6 years. And that's 2 pieces, both of which I was involved in, but really spearheaded by the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy that's been trying to drive greater political and policy awareness around the possibility of ocean-based climate action and really moving the discussion from the ocean and ocean economy as a victim of climate change, and obviously it is heavily impacted, but starting to share that there is a wealth of opportunity within the ocean and ocean ecosystems and ocean economy in terms of contributing to both mitigation and adaptation. So there was 2 reports, an initial one done in 2019 where we looked at 5 sectors. I'll show those in a sec. And then more recently in 2023, we went back and updated that early analysis with new projections for 2030, 2050, as well as adding into additional ocean sectors, the impact of phasing out offshore oil and gas, and the value of ocean and coastal tourism, decarbonisation. So 2019, based on those sort of initial 5 sectors, we found that ocean-based climate solutions could reduce the emissions gap by up to 21% on a 1.5 degree pathway and up to 25% on a 2 degree pathway in 2050. So very much putting the opportunity of action in these sectors based on what was technically feasible at the time, but based on full implementation, particularly sort of political buy-in, a huge potential. In the updated report that we released a couple of years ago, as I said, we added in 2 sectors which really added a significant amount of mitigation potential, particularly looking at offshore oil and gas, taking those figures in terms of a 2050 pathway up to 23% on a 1.5 degree trajectory, closing that emissions gap, or a 47% emissions gap contribution on a 2 degree pathway. So incredibly significant. And so the aim is to really put some of these opportunities to the fore. Just to put that into sort of a figure or perspective and to sort of highlight some of these sectors, because I'm going to touch on those again, sort of walking through what we're seeing in some of the early NDCs. Obviously, you can see the value of those sectors there, huge potential in coastal and marine ecosystems and fisheries and aquaculture. That was the 2019 report. And then when we looked at the updated analysis and adding in offshore oil and gas, as well as some emerging technologies around carbon capture and storage, you can see where that potential is and still very important from those original 5 sectors. So then to sort of provide a quick snapshot of what we're seeing so far in the NDCs that are being communicated. As I said, we're in the middle of the year when parties are expected to communicate their NDCs. However, we've only got 24 NDCs communicated to date, as of the 8th of May at least. 17 of those were from coastal or island nations, and then of those, 14 NDCs included at least 1 ocean-based commitment. When we're talking about ocean-based climate actions or commitments for the purposes of our analysis at least, we're not capturing all the references to the ocean in the NDCs. There's far more than 107 commitments, which is what we've captured here. What we are looking at is where countries have communicated a specific target, a clear policy or a measure that either aims to reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions or sequester them or support adaptation and resilience efforts. So we are capturing both mitigation and adaptation, given that many countries, if not most, use their NDC as a vehicle to communicate both components under the Paris Agreement. And we're focusing on actions that are forward-looking or capable of implementation, not just references or references to past action. So we're trying to sort of really capture what are the new things that countries are coming forward and saying that they'll do within the ocean-based climate space. So quite promising already to see just how many are coming through those 17 or 14 NDCs. And unsurprisingly, half of those were from small island developing states, where obviously ocean-based climate action is so important. Hopefully we'll hear a little bit more from that with one of our next speakers. To touch very briefly on then what we're seeing in terms of NBSAP communications, of the 14 countries where there were ocean-based actions in their NDCs, 5 of those countries had also communicated an NBSAP. So for those 5, we then went through a process of analysing the synergies between the ocean-based actions communicated in the NDCs and where there were points of alignment or synergies within the NBSAP. Of those synergies or those interactions that we captured, 74% of those were positive, either reinforcing or enabling which I think highlights the significant opportunity we have for policy cohesion between the climate and biodiversity agendas, particularly in the ocean space. 4%, I think there's only a couple what that translates to, were deemed potentially constraining, but again, most of these could be turned into at least neutral, if not positive or reinforcing, through careful implementation and policy alignment across those responsible for implementing climate priorities and biodiversity. Just a couple of slides now to sort of break down some of this analysis just out of interest. Most of the actions fell within coastal and marine conservation. Again, not a huge surprise there, given the wealth of opportunity in terms of nature-based solutions that are offered by blue carbon or coastal and marine ecosystems, both for mitigation and adaptation. Also, a lot of actions speaking to coastal zone management and ocean and marine infrastructure, largely from a resilience perspective, again, using nature-based solutions rather than sort of grey infrastructure in those spaces to improve the resilience of communities. And also worth noting, quite a few commitments coming through around fisheries and aquaculture in particular, improving the adaptive capacity or the resilience of these important economic sectors. This is just another sort of breakdown of where we're seeing those commitments across those sectors. A lot of commitments falling within the adaptation component, as you'd expect within coastal and marine conservation, coastal zone management, as I've mentioned, but we're also starting to see some mitigation commitments coming through around tourism, shipping, obviously, and ocean-based energy. Touched on most of this already, but really just highlighting that I think so far in the NDCs communicated, those 14 that have included ocean-based commitments, most of those actions are falling within the adaptation component of the NDC, and most of them are being expressed as a policy rather than as a quantified or quantifiable target, which is, again, I think, reflective of these commitments being very much about sort of the enabling environment for action. Interestingly, in terms of communicating the funding needs to implement many of these ocean-based climate actions, it's fairly even between countries indicating that they'll do this within domestic resources and where they need additional international finance. A couple of quick highlights from some of the sectors, and most of this will be picked up in later presentations. As I've said, coastal marine conservation was the largest sector for this analysis. We compared that to analysis that was done back in 2022 for the last round of NDCs, and that tracks that was still the most predominant sector covered for ocean-based climate actions. Interestingly, there has been an increase in that share. So within what's been communicated currently, certainly a lot more within the coastal and marine conservation sector, I think reflects the significant attention over the last couple of years, particularly around the global biodiversity framework and the 30 by 30 target. And some really nice commitments highlighted by the United Kingdom and Mozambique, two different examples of reflecting both the target as well as a measure or policy around nature-based solutions. Fisheries and aquaculture, third largest sector within sort of the commitments analysed, and we're seeing a reasonably even balance between mitigation and adaptation communicated. We'll hear about the Maldives commitment around fisheries in a sec, but they've included a number of actions aimed at both mitigation as well as improving the resilience of the fishery sector in their NDC, as has Kenya. And lastly, I mentioned that this was a significant area of ocean-based climate actions being communicated so far. As you can see, that represented an increase from what we saw back in 2022 from the last round, again reflecting, I think, the value of coastal resilience, and countries increasingly looking at strategies to improve the resilience of coastal infrastructure and communities. That is it for a bit of a whirlwind tour of what we're seeing in those first NDCs and NBSAPs that are starting to come out, and the types of commitments and policy actions that countries are making in this space and will be implementing over the next 5 to 10 years. There's a QR code. We will be publishing this as a very initial analysis. Also on that link is the Ocean Panel, links to the Ocean Panel reports that I mentioned earlier to provide some of that additional framing on ocean-based climate action. I would now like to hand over to my colleague to dive a little bit deeper into now what ocean accounts are and how they are particularly useful in touching on some of those priority actions and sectors that I just mentioned.
Thank you very much, Eliza. Very happy and to be here, and thank you for the invitation. So whilst I'll try to provide some insights on ocean accounts itself, but really taking it from a policy perspective, and particularly from small island developing states. So as Eliza already highlighted, my name is Angelique Pupono, and I'm the ocean lead for the Alliance, but also from the Seychelles. So we'll be drawing some of my own experiences from the Seychelles and being part of the NDC process back in 2020.
Thanks, Eliza. So yeah, just dialing in a bit more into how we can measure and manage towards these commitments that Eliza has mentioned. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jordan from the Center for Sustainable Development Reform and also the GOAP Secretariat. And so when we think about commitments, where do they come from? Well, we can have NDCs that go down into national legislation and policy, and then they have their own goals and targets. And we have, of course, different levers that we can pull to achieve those goals and targets. So for example, marine spatial planning, marine protected areas, blue economy strategies, and so on. Each of these should have an impact to the environment, to the economy, to society, and we're often tasked with producing indicators so that we can measure our progress towards our commitments. And we can also use that same data to inform how we can put these so-called implementation frameworks. So how can we inform marine spatial planning or marine protected areas with these indicators? And we suggest you can do that through ocean accounting. So accounting measures actions. And so to measure and manage progress, we need some common definitions and classifications. So how we define different parts of society, the economy, or the environment, so that we can report consistently, both spatially and across time. And of course, for specific periods as well. So what has changed between the last 2 years, since the last NDC update, and so on. So ocean accounts, they're a set of statistical accounts that measure the interaction between the ocean economy, ecosystems, and society. And the key difference here, as opposed to other approaches, is that they're aligned with international standards. So the standards coming specifically from the UN. So a long time ago, 1958, we have a standard for describing economic activity. And the recent revision actually just came out in the last few months. But it was only in 2012 rather, when we had a standard for looking at flows between the environment to the economy. So things like energy, water. And in 2021, we had one specifically for ecosystems, so ecosystem accounting. And that covers the extent or area of ecosystems, the condition of ecosystems, and also the services that they provide in both physical and monetary terms. And although designed for the national level, they've been applied at multiple scales now. So it's for specific areas, for example, marine protected areas, looking at how conservation has worked to change the ecosystems and improve outcomes. They've been done at regional scale, so looked at a bit between countries as well, and so potentially has applications for high seas. And also, of course, at the national scale. So what's the national extent of ecosystems? And also to inform blue economy assessments. And so those are the accounts, but how do we use them? So we can use them for strategic planning. So aligning policies, aligning outcomes, measurement of outcomes for marine spatial planning or for blue economy. And then monitoring and reporting ecosystems or economic growth of ocean sectors over time. So think state of environment reporting and also verification. So if you have financial instruments tied to ecosystems, how can we measure their impact? So one example of application could be result-based payments. But let me take you to marine spatial planning specifically, which is, of course, a very complex process. We could have areas zoned for tourism, beaches, offshore areas, reefs. And now they start to compete with novel sectors that are arising, such as offshore renewables, and traditional sectors, such as fisheries and aquaculture. So how can we identify how these ecosystems might be impacted or changing? And what are the trade-offs in terms of ecosystem services? And this is relevant, of course, to climate action. So as Eliza mentioned, the updated NDCs have an increasing focus to protect or restore ecosystems. And so this is aligning with the concept of ecosystem-based approaches and nature-based solutions, particularly for adaptation and mitigation planning.
Thinking about this very clear link between ocean accounts and the NDCs. So we've already heard from Eliza about how countries have been including ocean-based solutions into their NDCs. And a lot of them, as she's already highlighted, focus on these commitments to protect or restore ecosystems. And we've got all these terms: ecosystem-based adaptation, nature-based solutions, and so on. But as the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has highlighted the use of three critical blue carbon ecosystems: seagrass, mangroves, and salt marshes. But then when it comes to ecosystem-based adaptation, we also have the benefit of coral reefs.
So for some specific countries, we have nature-based solutions mentioned in a few NDCs now. And we also have the concept of ecological-based approaches or ecological transformation, such as in Brazil, Brazil's NDC. And how can we use these to link to sectors such as fisheries or marine spatial planning, for example? So let's take a look at mitigation specifically. So in terms of mitigation, you can combine all of the different data that are available into an account so that you can justify investment into protecting or conserving carbon sinks, such as seagrass or mangrove, and then also monitor the effectiveness of your actions, especially for blue carbon, known as mangrove, seagrass, and tidal marsh, those initiatives and payments or financial instruments related to those. So accounts could look at the sink or the natural asset like mangrove and how much carbon it captures. And then you could price that into a market instrument or look at just how much tons of carbon are being sequestered in important sinks within the country.
When countries are developing their NDCs, and certainly this was the experience in the Seychelles, it was, where should we place this nature-based solution type of commitments or these coastal marine protection commitments? Should it be in the mitigation section? Should it be in the adaptation section? And this is something that was very much influenced by the rigor and responsibility that comes with monitoring, reporting, and verification, where there was a sentiment that if you didn't if a country didn't feel that they were in a position to then fulfill this monitoring, reporting, and verification component of placing blue carbon ecosystems in the mitigation section, then there would be an immediate steer towards putting it in the adaptation section. Ocean accounts could really address this concern. And I think one of the things that the general international community has been pushing for is making sure that ocean-based solutions in NDCs are not just, yes, they come in different ways, measures, policy, or targets, but there's been a push to see if we can move it from this more policy-orientated measure type of action to more targets, to making them quantifiable. But of course, like every government, there's this question of, will I have the data? Will I be able to meet the obligation of the MRV frameworks? And this is where ocean accounts certainly provide this ability for you not just to show the ecological, economic, and social benefits of protecting your blue carbon ecosystems, but then to be able to see changes over time without the data to be able to inform whether this is being successful or what changes are happening over time. There is a reluctance to invest in such types of results-based financing instruments. So again, here I see the utility of ocean accounts, both in terms of meeting the MRV obligations that a country would have if they placed it under mitigation, as well as the opportunities that it presents when it comes to financing.
We also have to remember that these ecosystems don't just sequester carbon, they do a lot of other important things for society and the economy that might enhance resilience against climate change. So for example, coastal protection against storm surges. They could also have an influence on food security for wild fish catch, and also flood mitigation as well. So that can start to tie into the multiple benefits for adaptation. So we know that healthy ecosystems, they act as a natural buffer. So we can start to combine data from the ocean accounts to understand their health over time and understand how critical they are for understanding vulnerability of coastal communities. So for example, in coastal protection, we can start to look at where is the protection being afforded on this island, for example. Where are the infrastructure and homes that are being protected by coral reefs? And who on this island is most at risk? So you can see blue is the coastline, and then red are those that actually require protection or that are being afforded protection by coral reefs. Not to say that the entire coastline isn't being protected, but for the specific point in time that you're interested in, where are the homes and infrastructure being protected? And so we can start to think of accounts, ocean accounts, for spatial planning. So where to invest or where to zone. So identifying those sinks, important carbon sinks to restore those habitats or conserve those habitats. And also for adaptation. Where can we zone to maximize the existing ecosystem services that underpin resilience and reduce climate change impacts? And so when we're doing all of our actions, we can look at ocean accounts to answer some of these questions. So it's really a way to align a lot of the strategic actions that we have and understand and measure their effectiveness over time, so that hopefully we'll have high quality projects into the future that achieve their goals and objectives.
I'm now going to move to ocean accounts and finance. Now, especially with the loss and damage fund, where there's a need to really show what response do you need as a result of climate impacts. And one of the things that's particularly interesting is if you have ocean accounts, not only can you show how ecosystems are changing over time, but if you introduce the social component, you can also show how people's livelihoods, cultures, well-being is being affected as a result of these climate impacts.
So just in conclusion, climate change impacts, they're not experienced uniformly. So certain communities and demographic groups are affected. But with ocean accounts, we can start to capture the vulnerability and resilience and start to plan and address the risks from climate change. And then the true value of the accounts is really to bring all of this data together so that we're informing policy and we're also tracking progress towards these commitments that we've made through the NDCs. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Jordan. All right, I would now like to introduce our panelists. Start off with you, Lasama. So Lasama Sabri is an Ocean Accounts Fellow with us at the Global Ocean Accounts Partnership, but also a Senior Conservation Officer within the Maldives Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Technology. She's got over a decade of experience in conservation. She's been instrumental in updating the Maldives National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, NBSAP, and serves as a national focal point for many of the environmental conventions, and has really been spearheading advancing ocean accounting and natural capital accounting as a tool for sustainable marine resource management in the Maldives. And I will put in a little bit of a plug that the Maldives so far is the only NDC that has specifically included an action around natural asset valuation through the expansion of natural capital accounting to inform decision making, which is really exciting. Welcome, Lasama, and thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell me a little bit about the ocean accounts that Maldives has developed or is developing and exploring so far, and in particular sort of what those accounts focus on, the different regions, and I think the decision making or the policy impetus that drove some of those accounts?
Thank you so much, Eliza. I would say that the first ever ocean accounts for the Maldives is currently being developed under a pilot project focused on one of the atolls for Maldives, known as Lamu Atoll. And this pilot project would help us, it's the beginning of ocean accounting for the Maldives, so it would help us expand and replicate the process throughout the Maldives in the future. This project is funded by Global Environment Facility, and we contracted University of New South Wales in Australia to develop these ocean accounts for Lamu Atoll. And we have 3 priority ecosystems for Lamu Atoll, which are coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrass beds. The objective of this pilot is to not only assess the natural capital of Lamu Atoll, but also to establish a model that could be replicated across the entire Maldives. And I would also want to highlight here that these accounts would undergo periodic review process so that it will be relevant and it can be used in the decision-making process as we go along. As in the future, we are aiming to scale up the process and develop ocean accounting for the entire Maldives. We are hoping that this process would help us in mainstreaming and embedding biodiversity conservation and ecosystem service valuation into the heart of national planning, and that these accounts will play a critical role in promoting the sustainable development of Maldives, because Maldives is currently undergoing a rapid development process. In the past 20 years as well, we have been developing at a very fast pace. So it is very important for us to conserve, protect, and manage our natural assets. And following NDC project's pilot in Lamu Atoll, we also have some other initiatives by the government of Maldives and other partners in expanding natural capital accounting to other parts of the Maldives. For example, through GOAP, we are hoping to replicate the process in Formula Atoll, which is a very unique one island atoll ecosystem that has a very rich marine and coastal biodiversity. And also through the GEF 8 replenishment cycle, we are developing a new project that would do natural capital accounting or ocean accounting for Bodutila Dummati atoll, which is the largest atoll in the Maldives, and it would be a little bit different from the process in Lama atoll because there will be more stakeholders engaged. It is an atoll which also has about 4 other administrative atolls. It's a one natural atoll, but so it will be a bit more complex. So of course we will be using the lessons learned from Lama process in the Bodutila Dummati atoll process. And other than that, we will be using the accounts in the development of marine spatial planning for the Maldives and also in the establishment of marine protected areas in the Maldives. Since we are a country that is extremely dependent on coastal and marine biodiversity, the protection of this biodiversity is very important for us. Currently, we have 93 protected areas focusing on coastal and marine ecosystems, but a lot of them are not well managed. So we hope that through this process, we are able to contribute to the process of conservation and area-based conservation measures that would help us ensure that we are able to sustainably use our natural capital in the Maldives. So just in summary, I would say that we in the Maldives, we are shifting towards recognizing the value of ocean accounting, and it's just to know what we have in our country and also to inform decision-making process, because unless we have better decision-making when it comes to perhaps even dredging and reclamation projects or other sort of development projects, we might not be moving towards sustainability. So it is very important for us to understand what we have, whether it's coral reefs, mangroves, or seagrass beds, and also understand how they contribute to our daily lives, our well-being, our economy, and all of that, and how we are able to better manage and sustainably use them for generations to come.
Thank you so much, Lasama. That was incredibly helpful to really sort of lay out the ambition that Maldives had and really touch on some of the value and the uses that you're seeing from ocean accounts and expect to see from ocean accounts. I have one quick follow-up question. And you spoke a lot about using ocean accounts to really understand and inform decision-making towards sustainability. From the perspective of understanding vulnerabilities to climate impacts, sea level rise, shifting fish stocks perspectives, how are you seeing, or how do you hope to see ocean accounts providing sort of an evidence base to inform decision making to improve sort of the resilience of the ocean sector in Maldives?
As I mentioned in my earlier answer, we are a country that is extremely vulnerable to the impacts of global climate change. We are a low-lying island nation, and we face significant threats from sea level rise, extreme weather events, storm surges, and coastal erosion. But our natural environment, coral reefs, seagrass beds, and mangroves, they play a critical role in protecting us from these threats. They act as natural buffers, they reduce coastal vulnerability, and they contribute directly to the livelihoods, economy, and well-being of our communities. So this is why it is important for us to use ocean accounting to help us understand and communicate the value of the ecosystem functions and services, so that it would guide us towards policies that strengthen climate resilience and promote sustainable development. Ocean accounting, this process also provides essential data for climate change adaptation planning in the Maldives, because as a small island developing state, our long-term survival depends on building adaptive capacity. And ocean accounting supports this process by allowing for more targeted and strategic planning. In addition to resilience, ocean accounting also helps generate, sometimes we can generate monetary estimates of the value of healthy ecosystems. And this is something that's very important for us because our economy drives tourism sector and fisheries sector. For example, the tourism industry represents approximately 28% of our national GDP and is the largest economic sector in the Maldives. And this sector derives direct benefits from our biodiversity and ecosystems, and this strong dependence on marine biodiversity, I would say, further underscores the need for safeguarding our ecosystems and also understanding our ecosystems. And you also mentioned fisheries sector, so I would briefly touch upon that as well. For us, healthy ecosystems is important to boost our fisheries sector. We are a country that is heavily import dependent, and that is, I would say, the one way where we could achieve food security. And this is something very important in the face of climate change impacts for us. And fisheries sector also support employment and also provide export income for the Maldives. I would say that's the biggest export for us, because other than that, we do not export anything from the Maldives. And so for both fisheries sector and tourism sector, I would say they are directly linked to the health of marine habitats and biodiversity. So for this reason, we need to really move towards understanding and protection of these ecosystems. So this is why we have now prioritized marine conservation. As I said earlier, we have now 93 protected areas in the Maldives, and we hope that this process would not just help in conservation, but also help us plan for better strategic planning in the Maldives. And just I would say that in summary, ocean accounting is a critical tool for Maldives because it helps us build climate resilience. It guides us towards sustainable development and also safeguards the natural capital that supports our economy, whether it is fisheries or tourism.
Thank you so much, Summer. I think that encapsulated so many of my questions beautifully. Now I would like to turn to Jessica Pinkan from Indonesia, in particular the Rekam Nuasantara Foundation in Indonesia. Indonesia, alongside Maldives, is an incredibly important archipelagic nation with some of the world's most rich and diverse marine ecosystems, and also a country that has really been spearheading the development of ocean accounts and really integration of ocean accounts into decision-making and investment decisions. And Rekam has been a crucial partner in delivering that for the government. So Jessica, you are the Blue Carbon Program Manager with Rekam. You have expertise in GIS, remote sensing, many years of deep experience in marine spatial planning and conservation. And you now lead the development and implementation of all the nature-based solutions addressing climate change through ecosystem protection and restoration, working really closely with both the Indonesian government, but also local communities and other NGOs, as well as internationally. So thank you again for making time to join us. Can you tell me a little bit about Indonesia's commitment to ocean accounts, and in particular the sort of dashboard that was launched in mid last year, and sort of how this commitment to comprehensive and integrated ocean accounts is enabling informed decision making from an adaptation or a mitigation perspective for Indonesia's ocean economy?
Thank you, Elsa. Indonesia's commitment to ocean accounts began in 2020 with a pilot project in Gili Matra Marine Protected Area. and expanded to 9 additional pilot projects across the country. In 2024, we took a major step forward by launching the Ocean Accounts Dashboard, officially introduced during the 5th Global Ocean Dialogue and Sustainable Ocean Development in Sanur, Bali. The dashboard itself is a practical tool designed to make complex ocean data accessible and usable for decision makers. It organizes ecological, economic, and social data into one platform to support integrated marine and coastal management. This is where ocean accounts play a vital role by providing integrated data on ecological conditions, economic impacts, and social vulnerabilities. This kind of holistic insight is essential to balance development with environmental and social priorities, making ocean account a powerful tools for informed, responsible decision making.
Thanks so much, Jessica. And I think a really nice sort of tie-in around some of the coastal resilience and the decision-making between, pursuing the nature-based solution approach in terms of resilience or going down sort of the great infrastructure route that we talked about earlier. Keen to understand a little bit more and sort of pick up on some of the points that Angelique was making around the use of ocean accounts, particularly to support decision-making around the establishment of MPAs, sort of where to establish them, so the protection measures, and then obviously potentially down to the monitoring and long-term management to really make the most of these MPAs from a blue carbon perspective. I think acknowledging just how rich Indonesia's ecosystems are in that respect, but also from a resilience perspective. So it would be great to speak to some practical examples of how Indonesia's ocean accounts have been influential in that MPA process from a climate perspective.
Okay, Indonesian. With the ocean account, it helps us to identify priority areas where MPS can be established or expand to maximize protect and enhancement of the blue carbon stocks by layering ecological and spatial data. It pinpoints location or areas where intervention will yield the highest climate and biodiversity returns. Ocean accounts also provide us a framework for tracking changes in ecological condition and carbon condition over time. Within MPAs, this allows decision makers to assess whether conservation measures are actively preserving blue carbon ecosystems and delivering measurable climate benefits. Working with valuation, ocean accounts translates ecological function into economic terms by quantifying the carbon storage capacity for mangrove for marine ecosystems. This helps highlight their value not just for biodiversity, but as a critical natural asset in Indonesia's climate mitigation strategy. In terms of funding, by providing transparent, science-based data, Ocean Accounts supports Indonesia access to many climate finance. It strengthens the case for investments in blue carbon credits and nature-based solution. Ocean account track progress against national and international commitments, such as Indonesia's climate goals under the Paris Agreement, its biodiversity targets, and the objective of the blue carbon roadmap.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Lasama, for responding to my questions. I'd now like to open it up to any questions from the audience to Jessica, Lasama, Jordan, myself. We've got one to kick us off. I'm going to direct this initially to you, Jordan, and then it would be really interesting if Lasama and Jessica, you have any, I think, experience from working with ocean accounts that you can add to Jordan's response. How does ocean accounting deal with conflicting objectives? This came up a little bit when I was talking about the NDCs and BSAPs. If coastal infrastructure assists with climate adaptation but negatively impacts biodiverse coastal ecosystems, so I suppose we're talking about grey infrastructure, seawalls and things like that. How does ocean accounting deal with or could deal with or provide information relevant to this kind of conflicting policy objective? Jordan?
Sure. Thanks, Janice, for the question. So fundamentally, ocean accounting provides the baseline information to make a more holistic and informed decision. So if you didn't have an understanding of the ecosystem services and also what ecosystems were there, you don't really know what you're losing if you're just doing grey infrastructure. So if you can do that cost-benefit analysis and to see what you're losing or what services are being degraded because of that seawall and how that might affect other aspects like food security or even some of the services that are already provided. Like, for example, can we mix mangroves into coastal protection as well? Does it need to be replaced if there's mangroves already there? Can we work it into a green-gray kind of infrastructure solution? That's something that can be facilitated by ocean accounting.
Thanks, Jordan. I think it's a great example of, again, sort of coming back to the point of the importance of aligning NDCs and NBSAPs as well. If you've got targets to meet around ecosystem protection and restoration, really understanding how you can use those ecosystems to deliver on some of your climate priorities, particularly coastal resilience and adaptation, and then use ocean accounting as the tool that informs that decision-making process. Now, not in all areas, you won't be able to necessarily use nature-based solutions, but before sort of moving down or looking at a pure climate lens of a seawall, I think ocean accounting enriches that evidence base within which to make that decision. And if you've got ecosystems there and those broader services that they provide, you know, fisheries and food security and others, it becomes a little bit easier in terms of that policy trade-off decision. Jessica and Lasama, did you have is there anything that's been thrown up in your work domestically where there's been sort of conflicts that Ocean Accounts has helped provide evidence to at least inform the policy decision?
We are at a very early stage, but I would say that we see ocean accounts in helping us with dealing with competing economic sectors and ensuring that there is sustainable development. So ocean accounts would help in better planning, better decision making, and specifically for high-level decision-making, such as cabinet level or parliament level. So I would say that in the future, I do see this as helping us. We do deal with conflicting interests, a lot of the times conflicting objectives. So this is an area where ocean accounts would really help us.
Thanks, Lasama. I think a nice point to make here around ocean accounts is that they are policy neutral in a way. They are an evidence base. They're not necessarily going to determine, you know, a way that a policy decision or investment will go, but it is about providing a very neutral evidence base to resolve some of these conflicts. Another question is whether there's any risks of putting a value to ecosystems and their components. and I should say, I suppose, at the outset, is that Ocean Accounts as a framework is not a valuation tool. It is a data framework that enables relevant data to be compiled in such a way that it can speak to decision making and certainly speak to similar accounting frameworks. So put ecosystems on a similar setting as other aspects of economic decision-making tools such as GDP. It's not necessarily a valuation tool in and of itself. Okay, so another one. For countries that don't have a national ocean account, we've heard from countries that do, but if you don't or haven't taken any steps towards that, what are the most accessible first steps in terms of tracking the contribution of ocean-based sectors to climate mitigation? And is there any low-hanging fruit that should be prioritised?
In my opinion, for countries just beginning their journey with ocean accounting, it's like just the same thing like we did in Indonesia. We just do the most accessible. First step is start with what's already available. That means we are compiling and organizing existing data from different sectors. Many of this data actually already exists in maybe in the government agencies or by research institution, or even for us with satellite observation. So we just creating a simple baseline based on that data.
One more quick question from the audience in 2 minutes, and then we'll wrap. Is ocean accounting accessible to grassroots community groups, or is it expensive, complex, and mainly accessible to governments? Again, I'll throw this open to Jessica, Jordan, or Lasama to jump in and provide response in a couple of minutes.
Sure. So, very good question. What I would say is it's a very new field, and we're all learning together in terms of the methods and how to apply them to data. Now, fundamentally, where the data comes from is at the local level, from communities and scientific research, for example. And so to put that together and produce accounts still requires some expertise, but if you don't have data, then you can't produce accounts fundamentally. So it really is a collaboration from the local scale all the way up to the national scale, having those data pipelines where you can funnel the data from that local scale all the way to national. And I might throw this to Jessica in terms of the work in Central Java, in terms of how you collected the data and how those become accounts.
The data that we are gathered from the consisting of extent to support the BCAF project. And for the conditions, it's also support the project that we do with BCAF to decide the area that we are want to working with the community.
I think that's all we have time for in terms of questions. To conclude this webinar and really look forward to many of those events that I mentioned at the start, the UN Ocean Conference, but particularly the Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue that'll be happening immediately after the UN Ocean Conference in Bonn. I'd like to welcome Jasdeep Randhawa, who is the Ocean Lead within the UNFCCC Secretariat. She's an international environmental lawyer, policy specialist with deep expertise in in this area. So we're very glad you can join us. So Jasdeep, over to you.
Thank you so much, Eliza. I just wanted to, on behalf of UNFCCC Secretariat, thank you and the GOAP Secretariat for the opportunity to present and also for organizing such an important webinar, given the strategic timing ahead of the UN Ocean Conference and the Ocean Dialogue at UNFCCC and COP30. So as we have heard from the experts today and the speakers, ocean accounts is a vital tool that can help decision makers quantify the social, environmental, and economic benefits of sustainable ocean management through records of data on the ocean health and developing social, environmental, and economic indicators. Indeed, it is both a critical evidence-based decision-making tool and also a science tool. As we also know, both under the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement and the IPCC report on the ocean and climate, ocean is a very vital ecosystem to support unique habitats. And all these reports and the conventions have noted the interconnections with other components of the climate system. We do also know, and as has also been provided to you through these various publications, that the ocean is both a victim of the climate crisis, but also an important ally. Now, I really want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about what's happening under the UNFCCC process on the ocean climate nexus. Now, under the process, the Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue is the only mandated process which encourages parties to strengthen ocean-based climate action through inclusion of ocean-based measures in national climate strategies, including NDCs that you've heard about today, and the national adaptation plans, and also encourages the relevant work streams and UNFCCC constituted bodies to integrate ocean-based activities into their work streams. For example, the Technology Executive Committee has a dedicated ocean work stream. The first mandated biennium ocean dialogue has been held in 2023 and 2024, facilitated by co-facilitators that were selected by both developed countries and developing countries under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. And the dialogue today is a very vital forum for parties and observers to both enhance collaboration, understand and strengthen ocean-based climate action, exchange good practices on ocean-based mitigation and adaptation solutions, and also highlight key messages on the dialogue topics which are presented to the parties at the subsequent session of the COPs. Now, in the outcome of the first global stocktake, parties have welcomed the Ocean and Climate Dialogue, and the stocktake also invites parties to scale up ocean-based mitigation action, while also recognizing that ocean-based adaptation and resilience measures can reduce a range of climate change risks while delivering multiple co-benefits. The outcome of the first global stocktake also encourages parties to come forward in their NDCs with very ambitious economy-wide emission reduction targets that need to cover all the greenhouse gases sectors and categories to aligning with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which, as you know, is the long-term temperature goal under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. Now, we do see that in the 2024 NDC synthesis report of the UNFCCC Secretariat, parties have reported on ocean-based measures to demonstrate climate action. However, they are not sufficient, and the overall report has revealed that the current NDCs by parties are insufficient to contain the global emissions, which are not going to be cut down by half, which was needed by 2030 to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We've also heard today from Eliza on why the NDCs are very important economic blueprints and can deliver a range of human economic benefits, and which is also where, as Angelique mentioned, ocean accounts becomes very vital. Now, even though in the new or updated NDCs, we do see an encouraging trend on ocean-based policies, measures, and targets, we also see that most of these measures are not quantified. But however, this is understandable because it highlights the critical need of means of implementation for these ambitious NDCs, which includes ocean-based financing, access to technology, and capacity building. Now, in this background, we have the newly selected co-facilitators for the Ocean Dialogue coming from Brazil, who is also the presidency for COP30, and Belgium from developed countries. And they have communicated earlier this year to parties and observers on their vision on how the Ocean Dialogue can elevate the profile of the ocean climate nexus, including at COP30, by identifying selected priority areas. So the areas that have been identified in the 2025 dialogue, which is going to be held on the 17th and 18th of June in Bonn in a hybrid mode. First is translating ambition into action by developing and implementing sustainable ocean-based measures in the NDCs. The second is enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change by advancing ocean-based adaptation measures. And the third is strengthening synergies across the climate, biodiversity, and the ocean nexus. I just want to take a minute, given this background, on where we believe that the community here can actually contribute. So I'm trying to share my screen. I'm not able to again. If Bella, could you share the screen? Thank you so much. So based on the three topics, the first on the ocean-based measures in the NDCs, as we've heard today, from the ocean account sectors and also including from Indonesia, we have a number of areas where the community can actually engage in the dialogue because parties have asked for sharing practices, examples, case studies on these measures. And so I've identified a few of those sectors, and this is where the community can really contribute and also obviously encourage your party to include ocean targets in the newer updated NDCs, which have not been submitted yet and which are due to be submitted latest by 30th September 2025 before COP. And the second one is on the global goal on adaptation. There are indicators on ecosystem and biodiversity, very relevant to the work on ocean accounts that are being developed under the UAE framework on resilience, and to measure the targets and the progress on the global goal on adaptation under the Paris Agreement. And this is again where the ocean account work becomes very vital on the indicators. And the third on the synergies, I know a lot of you are going to the UN Ocean Conference, and the UN Ocean Conference outcomes, including the one on the Ocean Climate Biodiversity Action Panel, are very vital to the ocean dialogue feeding of messages to COP. So that's an area. And then the other area is contributing to the indicators under the Kunming-Montreal Global Framework. Those indicators are again very, very vital for this nexus, and which is where again the ocean account team can really help. And finally, on the BBNJ agreement, where a lot of your countries are going through a ratification and implementation, and a lot of speakers today spoke about marine protected areas and other coastal zone management areas, and this is again where you could contribute. And finally, as everything is related to means of implementation and finance, this is again an area where sharing studies and your own challenges and experiences can be very beneficial. So this is all we have time for. I'm very happy to share more details of the Ocean Dialogue and look forward to your contribution. Thanks, Eliza.
Thank you so much. That was such a perfect ending, sort of taking us forward into the rest of the year. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all my panelists and speakers. I hope to see many of you in UN Ocean Conference, if not Bonn for the Ocean Climate Dialogue. Thank you.